This is the fabulous Kathy Best. You can read all about her bio. She'll reference it later on. We had a keynote speaker. She's going to speak about CAT, but I want you guys to understand how important Kathy Best is to ADAO and what her husband also meant to ADAO, Andy Schneider. And on the basis of their important work that they did and who they are, she's going to be our keynote speaker today. Thank you for allowing me to indulge. Thank you.
Fine.
Now rock.
So it's great to be here today and to see some old friends, but for those of you who don't know me, as Linda said, I'm the wrong Kathleen. You're supposed to be hearing today from Kathleen McGrory, who is an amazing investigative reporter for ProPublica. She and a partner wrote a compelling series of stories documenting how chemical companies were knowingly poisoning people with asbestos. But shit happens. In this case, it was Hurricane Idalia, and it flooded Kat's house, sending her scrambling to find a place for her family to live. So last weekend, she let Linda and me know that she couldn't give this speech, and instead you're getting me. Usually, I'm the one introducing the speakers for the Andrew Schneider Memorial Lecture. That means that each year, I tell you a little bit about the reporter's work that's being honored that year, and a little more about why it's important for the people in this room to support that work. This year, I'm going to tell you instead a lot about the state of the news industry and why investigative reporting matters now more than ever. Then I'm really hoping that we can have a conversation. I know you're hungry. I know that we're running a little bit late. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then I hope you'll ask me questions. Our democracy cannot function without an informed electorate. But in the last 20 years, well, since 1995, hold on one second. You're about to find out why I'm not a broadcaster. So, hang on, one. Okay. Okay. Since 2005, more than 2,200 local print newspapers have closed. The number of newspaper journalists has been cut in half. These are the people who do much of the informing that makes sure that we have an informed electorate. So it's no wonder that most people in the United States still believe that asbestos has been banned here. That was a startling misperception that Andy found when he did his work on Libby, Montana in 1999, and when Kat McGrory did more reporting last year, she found the same thing was true. Thanks to the relentless advocacy from Linda Reinstein and ADAO, that misperception may turn into reality soon. And you're going to hear from people with a lot more expertise than me about how that might happen. If it does happen, the devil, as always, will be in the details. And that means it will be more important than ever for the people in this room to be on alert so that you can make sure that the news about that ban is reported accurately, fully, and with context. And that's exactly what this whole lecture series is about. It's why it was created. Andy could not have done his job without your help. He spent years reporting on the asbestos poisoning of miners in Libby, of the families that the miners exposed when they came home covered in dust. He wrote about the kids who played baseball on fields in Libby, Montana, contaminated by asbestos fibers, and the kids who ran on tracks paved with vermiculite, laced with tremolite fibers. He followed the vermiculite from Libby across the country, writing about the deadly dangers posed by processing plants in cities across America. He wrote about the insulation made with Libby vermiculite that's in the attics of thousands of homes in the US and Canada. And he followed Libby vermiculite to New York, where it was used to coat beams, fireproofing beams, for the World Trade Center, and so therefore released in the dramatic fashion that you just saw. To do that reporting, he had to develop expertise in chemistry and pulmonology. He had to learn the difference between SEM and TEM microscopy. He had to learn the different forms asbestos fibers took and why some could be more lethal than others. He had to learn the history of how asbestos came to be used in so many products, putting so many Americans at risk. You were his teachers. Since his death in 2017, you've helped those who have continued this important reporting. I think there have been 4 or 5 people who gave this lecture since then. You helped teach David McCumber, Andy's editor on the original Libby series, and his co-author on the book, An Air That Kills, what he needed to know to continue exposing asbestos atrocities in Libby and beyond. You taught Wendy Ruderman, who told the story in her Philadelphia Inquirer series of a teacher who developed mesothelioma after being exposed to asbestos in 2 of the city's contaminated schools. You taught David Borax, who produced audio stories for Charlotte's NPR station about environmental racism in the battle to clean up asbestos contamination in Davidsonville, North Carolina. And you taught Kat McGrory and her reporting partner, Neil Bedai, who I hope will be here next year to discuss their work in detail. As ADAO knows, the story of asbestos is complicated. It's a silent killer that can take decades to take a life. What Linda said the organization, that's why Linda said the organization's motto is art, advocacy, and action. And that's why you've developed visuals like that incredibly powerful photo of a penny and human hairs and grains of rice and 20,000 asbestos fibers. I mean, that's incredible. The good news is that pretty soon, those visuals will be able to be shown to more reporters. On Thursday, a coalition of philanthropies and foundations announced a new initiative called Press Forward that will infuse more than $500 million, that's billion with a B, into local journalism over the next 5 years. Their goal is to quickly increase that investment into $1 billion. Press Forward, the MacArthur Foundation said in its release, seeks to reverse the dramatic decline in local news that has coincided with an increasingly divided America and weakening trust in institutions. The timing of this investment is absolutely critical. With our democracy under siege, we need reporters writing about school board and city council meetings. We need them covering the courts and checking budgets. We need them to counter the rumors with facts and to blow the whistle when officials are lying. This investment is a huge step in the fight to reverse the growing news deserts in our country. But it's not the only good news about news. As traditional newspapers have been declining, new nonprofit newsrooms have been springing up to fill some of the gaps. In 2009, 27 nonprofit newsrooms dedicated to investigative reporting gathered in New York. They pledged to fulfill, quote, an urgent need to nourish and sustain the emerging investigative journalism ecosystem to better serve the public. With support from philanthropies, they've done just that. Today, there are more than 425 members, 2/3 of them focusing on investigative and explanatory reporting in the Institute for Nonprofit News, which is the umbrella organization for these nonprofit newsrooms. Okay, so I want to be transparent. These nonprofit newsrooms are not big. The median staff size is just 5 people, but because they believe in collaboration, they're mighty. They band together to do the kind of in-depth investigative work, sharing resources and then distributing it, regionally and sometimes nationally. The biggest and best of the nonprofits is ProPublica, which is where Kat McGrory works. It allowed her to spend 9 months reporting her series called Toxic Burdens. That kind of journalism is expensive, and not just in a reporter's time. Investigative reporters usually have to travel, sometimes globally, to interview sources or to see the places that they're writing about. They often have to spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars to get copies of the kind of government documents that they need to do their work. They spend a lot of money on lawyers. I love lawyers, but they need to be paid. They need to eat too, so that they can sue to get information, critical information from government. And then they often have to defend themselves, sometimes from frivolous suits that are just designed to stop them from publishing. Despite these challenges, last year, the nation's largest organization of investigative journalists had more than 5,200 members. Demand for investigative reporting is up. Without advertising to pay the bills, newsrooms have pivoted to subscriptions, and they've realized that the best way to get people to pay for what they do is to provide them with compelling stories that they can't get anywhere else. That's the definition of investigative reporting. That's one of the reasons that we are continuing to put more investigative reporters in the pipeline. After Andy's death, I moved to the University of Maryland to become the founding director of the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. I could think of no better way to honor my husband's legacy than to train the next generation of investigative reporters. The students I work with take my breath away with their commitment and talent and passion. They learn investigative skills by producing national investigations that are so good that they're winning awards competing against the pros. But like every reporter, they need people to guide them while they're in school, of course, but also critically once they land jobs in the real world. So I'm here today to ask you to be their guides. Share your knowledge with them. Teach them the right questions to ask. Help them accurately interpret the answers that they get. The time you spend will pay off in better journalism. Better journalism, in turn, will produce smarter citizens, and smarter citizens will demand deeper public policy debates around deadly substances like asbestos. Thank you. So, I know you're hungry, but ask me a couple questions. Yes, please.
So well trained. Thank you, Doctor.
I've been coming here for a lot of years.
Thanks so much for that wonderful talk. And, Andy really did do a marvelous job with looking into what was going on. And I think you'd be appalled at some of the reactionary activities by the industry in that community. So that's a whole other story. My question to you is, I'm still somebody, I'm old-fashioned enough, I read 2 newspapers every day, watch the news. I'm not on social media, but unfortunately, so many people in this country now get their news, as they say, on social media. Right. And all of the social media sites, especially with the upcoming election, are not going to vet the statements. And they don't vet statements about climate change. They don't vet statements about science. We have an anti-science mentality, growing in this country. So I'm wondering if you might comment on the role of the social media platforms where so many people get their misinformation these days, and how one competes with that.
Great question, and things are getting worse. There was a court decision yesterday, and I think it was the Fifth Appellate Court, but that said that the Biden administration violated the Constitution by asking social media platforms to take down information about COVID. So, misinformation. Yeah, exactly. Misinformation, yes. And so that going into the election cycle is terrifying to me. I think that news organizations understand, and then, Elon Musk bought Twitter, renamed it X, and he doesn't appear to give a damn about the quality of the information that people post. In Canada, Facebook has taken news off of Facebook, so if you're a Canadian and that was how you were getting your information, you're not getting it anymore. It's a mess. So news organizations are combating that by hiring engagement editors, which means that there are professionals working with the reporters to use social media in a variety of ways to get the message out. They're also developing newsletters, which end up in people's email every morning with the headlines and the stories that they should know. But, I don't know the right answer, other than I think we all have to take responsibility to understand what's real and what's not, and talk to our family and friends about, for God's sake, don't just share a tweet or a Facebook post if you don't know whether it's right, if you don't know whether it's accurate. So yeah, unfortunately, that's the best I can offer. Well, longer term, schools, grade schools, high schools, universities are teaching media literacy. So I'm hoping that, kids are learning the difference, but at the same time, yeah, right, yeah. But on top of that, just as at a time when we're teaching kids media literacy and how to tell the difference between fact and fiction, AI comes along, and it's complicated and messy out there.
I have a question, if I could. So the new foundation, $500 million, is a great contribution to reviving, supporting local news. You have students who do investigate learning or investigative reporting. What is a strategy really for making that kind of work financially sustainable?
Yeah, so great question. And I mentioned the subscription model, getting people to pay, but, and when I say that, what I'm really talking about is people who subscribe to a digital news operation. not so much people who subscribe to a newspaper, although, if you do, God bless you. But I think the long-term solution is going to be a combination of subscriptions and philanthropy. There are also efforts to get congressional legislation that would either provide substantive tax breaks or even subsidies to newspapers. The problem with that strategy is that all newspaper owners or television owners are not created equal. So, there are people in my industry who are like, yeah, we want to support local journalism, but no, we don't want to subsidize Sinclair and its sort of right-wing television stations, or we don't want to subsidize Alden Capital, which is the venture capitalist firm that bought up all kinds of newspapers, including the Tribune newspapers. The Chicago Tribune is the paper I grew up with, and my heart breaks when I look at it. So, again, it's complicated, but I think that it's going to be a combination of different things, but I think there's a realization now, in part because of the political environment that we live in, that something has to happen. And I think philanthropies get it and will help bridge the gap until we figure out a longer-term solution. When I was the editor of the Seattle Times, we got a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to finance the education reporting that we were doing. And the foundation said, we'll give you this money for a year, and during that year, you have to figure out how to make it sustainable. It was very evident that after a year, we had not found a way. After 2 years, we had not found a way. After 3 years, we had not found a way, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just realized if they want good quality education coverage in Seattle, they're going to have to make this long-term, and they did. Since then, the Seattle Times has started, we called it Education Lab. Since then, they've started 4 or 5 other labs in the newsroom that are little nonprofits within a for-profit company, and the little nonprofits are all supported by philanthropy because people care about investigative reporting, they care about transportation coverage, they care about homelessness. So that's one model.
The sandwiches are out there, and I know everyone's hungry, so maybe you'll stay and mingle, but I do have a question.
Okay.
And Andy was a great teacher of grit and honesty and determination, to the point where I think I was first scared when I met Andy, and then he soon called me kid. That being said, when we talk to journalists and we try to pitch a story, it's either not newsy enough or it's too complicated. Mm-hmm. So as an investigative journalist, are there 3 or 5 things we could do better? So 1, we don't write the story for them, and 2, keep their interest up that it's a story that they can write, because we kind of live in both worlds, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah. So a couple of things. And I'm going to talk first just about local news and how you can get your local news organization interested. One is, those diaphragms, I'm sure, are used in local water treatment plants all over the country, and I'm looking at the guy from Olin, hoping he will tell me if that's true. Okay, so that's one way that you can do it. You could find out, does your local water treatment plant use one of these diaphragms, and if so, what are they going to do if there's an asbestos ban? How are they going to change things? And also, it gives them a local way in to a story. Another thing that you can do is as some of the speakers today have noted, there's a two-part problem here. One is the ban. Two is what do you do with the legacy asbestos? It's everywhere. And so, you know, Celeste talked about the city of Albuquerque, where they were doing a horrible job of just, you know, taking a building down unsafely. That's happening all across the country. So, you know, again, it's about educating, but, you know, talk to reporters as this becomes more of an issue about talking to their cities or their counties to see if there is an inventory of buildings that contain a lot of asbestos, and is there a plan in place from the city or the county to oversee work on those buildings. Also, and I just got this idea today in listening to the speakers, if there's a fire, a big fire in your town, find out what was the insulation in the attic of that place. Did that building contain asbestos? And if so, again, what policies are in place to protect the firefighters who put their lives on the line to put that fire out? So if you're dealing with an investigative reporter who's a little more sophisticated, what you're going to have to, the pitch you're going to have to give them is, okay, I know asbestos, people have written about it, there is something new, and you need to tell them what that new thing is. So for Kat McGrory, what got them interested in writing about the chemical companies was, first of all, that was a topic that had not been covered extensively. Two, a plant closed, which allowed them to interview people, which is critical because you want to have human beings, you want human faces in these stories, and that's really hard to do if you're working at a company, because if you speak out, you can get fired. So, you know, help connect the dots, help them see stories related to asbestos that haven't been told or haven't been told in the last 15 years. You know, personally, if I think it's time to go back to Libby, because it's been a long time. There are other stories like that that people could go back and revisit, and those are really good stories.